Hi, and welcome to the Parenting Playbook podcast. Today, I've got Nicole Bateman with me, who has created and developed the Super Sensory Squad. And she has two children, a 7-year-old son who has autism,
Yeah,
epilepsy,
he's autistic and has epilepsy.
and you've got a 5-year-old daughter as well, haven't
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
Yeah.
And today, we're going to talk a little bit about Nicole's experience that she's going through much now around her EHCP process and the challenges that so many parents experience when they go through a EHCP application and the challenges that come with that. And one of the things that I see quite a lot is when parents are going through this process and it doesn't go in the way that we anticipate, it can have a huge impact on our emotional well-being and by default, our environment. So I just wanted to speak to you today a little bit about that, Nicole, and just see what's been happening for you around your most recent application.
Yeah. So this story is a common story for many of us who have kids with special educational needs, disabilities, trying to get the support for our children. So I know that I'm not alone in it, and I know that some people listening may have gone through this too. So yeah, as Nicola said, my son is autistic and has epilepsy and sensory processing differences. And so some of those different things impact learning and all of those things. Around epilepsy, I love to, share and build awareness of epilepsy because it's more than the seizures. The seizures are not great, and I do not. It impacts me watching them, seeing them, being feeling that sense of helplessness that I know other parents who have kids with epilepsy feel too. But it's also for my son, he has abnormal brain activity all the time in his temporal lobe. So for that, the temporal lobe impacts emotions, cognition, and things like that. So there are often people think of epilepsy and think of flashing lights and shaking on the ground. And there's way more, there's many different seizure types, many different triggers. Only 3% of people are actually triggered by flashing lights who have epilepsy. So there's a lot there. And so on the EHCP forms, we share that impact. His seizures are still uncontrolled 3.5 years on, sadly. Medication, we've tried multiple different things, but it also has that impact on learning too. So it's safety at school, for example, for high risk activities like swimming, and at lunchtime as well. He was having lots of seizures because he felt anxious, and that's one of his triggers, but also then learning, impacting that right side of the brain, because he has focal epilepsy, which impacts one side. So maths, the logic, etc., all of that side not impacted. It's the other sides, that executive functioning too. So there's, that's just one thing in a very short thing, but you spend a lot of time as a parent educating people about the impacts of, for example, epilepsy that it has on my son and his learning, talking to family, talking to educators, talking to different professionals and trying to explain things to them. And that in itself, we always want to fight for our kids and stand up for our kids and share. He's also autistic, so that comes with different amazing strengths, but also some challenges there too. Um, and so the combination, the epilepsy and autism is, relatively co-occurring conditions often. Um, if you have epilepsy, you're more likely to be autistic, and it does not necessarily, but that's the statistics of it, and have sensory processing differences. So there, as you can see, there's a lot of different things that play a part in for my son, and different hurdles that he has to overcome to be able to access learning. So with the EHCP process, it was actually the pediatric epilepsy specialist that first of all said, okay, the meds aren't working to control seizures, but what we can do, rather than just having the meds approach, we can also then think about how we can support him with his learning needs too. So he a while back, probably about 2.5 years ago, put forward a letter to say that would, he would suggest that he needs that. It took a while for the school to put it through, because there's lots of kids that need that support, and you got to keep pushing for that. And so we applied, and we actually put it all together with a psych report, OT, speech and language, loads of different professionals inputting. We put it all together, and we got a no to assess um, in July. So we put it in May.
What is
So for the EHCP process, first of all, a panel have got to agree that they will assess for the suitability for them having an EHCP. So it's the first hurdle. And actually, in Send Law, there's only 2 criteria that you need to meet at that point to get an assessment, to get the kind of EHCP assessment. And that is, they may have SEND needs. So for my son, he definitely does. He's got 2 diagnoses, autism and epilepsy. So that tick. And then they may need an EHCP. So when we got a no to assess, we were shocked. Everyone was shocked, because you only legally have to go through those 2 criteria, which is quite a low bar, because it says they may need an EHCP. So realistically, the council had to prove that he definitely didn't need an EHCP, which, they, in my opinion, they wouldn't be able to prove that. So because it was the last day of term, we were then trying to, I was trying to get in touch with the council, trying to get a reason for why we got rejected, because they did not give a reason specifically. For 2 weeks, probably about 16 emails and phone calls later, 2 weeks later, someone got back to me after my hounding. But the thing is, often as a parent, before we are a parent, and I was a teacher as well, so I never wanted to be that pushy parent. But unfortunately, if you don't push, you don't get anything of support wise. And I push in a nice, kind way, but actually, um, if people aren't listening and people aren't responding, then we've just got to keep going. But that in itself takes a lot of time. So for those of you who, have a full-time job, or have other kiddies to look after, or, self-employed, for all of us, there's so many hours taken up
mm,
from writing emails, ringing, all of the things. So it's really tricky to be able to do that. Over the summer, I was feeling physical symptoms like dizziness and sickness, and some days I couldn't actually sit up without feeling dizzy. And I know that is because of that emotional and mental strain. And finally, they got back and they said, they gave a reason about how the school can provide for him. He doesn't need an EHCP because they can use Pneumicon. So for those of you who don't know what Pneumicon is like physical blocks and things like that to help someone with maths, and understanding that. In the EHCP for my son, it literally says his strength is maths. He doesn't need any support in maths. Like that it's all the kind of English comprehension, reading, writing, all of those kind of things. So for maths, his arithmetic especially is like, amazing. He loves it. It's one of his special interests, actually.
it's really common, isn't it? So
Yeah.
science is for them to be really strong in those areas. And one of the things that I just want to talk a little bit about what you've just said, the powerlessness that comes from this for parents, and that sense of, because as you say, we're their advocate, aren't we? We're the ones that are fighting for them. But it's, again, what I see in my work is so many doors get closed really, really easily, and trying to get through those doors is so hard for parents, and how that erodes at their overall well-being, as you've just said, that in the summer you weren't feeling very well at all.
No, absolutely. And you can understand. So, they told me they had about 380 or something applicants. And I said to them, when I actually spoke to them, I said, that's not on me. Like, as in, I'm concerned about my own child as an individual. It shouldn't be about numbers. And because they sent back saying school could do Pneumicon, I then replied and said, it's clear that you haven't actually read the EHCP, because it says that, his strength is maths. He doesn't need Numicon to help him in school. That it was a very clear copied and pasted, response, but for the wrong child, because it wasn't him. He didn't need that. And so that you just don't have that trust. That trust is eroded in the system, because you're like, you haven't actually read all of these different reports from 7 different professionals to share that. So we went to mediation. I went to mediation because school, again, it was a school holiday, so school went off and all of those things. And the person there was the only person who was honest the whole time. She said she was up at night after reading the previous day, all the papers, and I put forward my argument, and I said, "So can you tell me why he definitely doesn't need an EHCP, because that's what you've got to prove according to Send law?" And she said, I can't, so I'm overturning it." And I cried. I literally was like, just full on tears. And I
And
was
this
like,
was right at the beginning.
brilliant.
It's just,
Yeah.
gosh,
That was,
yeah. And you just had to fight to get an assessment. Sounds exhausting.
yeah, it was. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Finally, we've got an assessment, when actually legally looking at those 2 criteria, it should have just been put through. But there's so many funding issues and all of those things, but you're just like, are you kidding me? So it was relief. And then it's taken to, it went back to panel last week. So it's taken all that time to then wait for an ed psych. We've already had an educational psychologist report, but they don't trust private ones. So therefore you have to go on the waiting list. It's gone over it went way over the 20 weeks that they say that they're going to do it in. But, we had a co-production meeting and we sorted it out, and the Senko, myself, and the case officer thought, it was pretty good. I wasn't surprised when we got the phone call on Friday to say no, because I know that unfortunately, the council that we are part of is in talks about going into the safety valve, where the government, the DFE, Department of Education, going to bail them out if they agree to cutting, 60 EHCPs a month to 20, for example. I've been involved in a protest recently for that, and they haven't signed it yet. However, it's that pressure of being 60 plus million in debt at the moment in the education section of the council. So it's it's frustrating, because it's about money rather than about children. And it's gutting that, because every week matters for our children, every day matters for our children. And if they don't get that support that they need, then, school is not such a safe or happy place as it could be. And for me, I love to be proactive rather than reactive. And a lot of the things are reactive. It's, if my child, for example, was showcasing a fight response to anxiety, he freezes, so he just kind of goes within himself. But if he was showcasing a fight response, the school may have inputted it in sooner, because obviously he's then, which fair enough, but it's tricky, because it's like, actually different kids will showcase different responses. Their nervous system will respond in different ways to certain triggers in the classroom. It's just hard. So again, it's gearing myself up right now to fight again, to go to mediation again, and potentially tribunal this time. You never know. I mean, I hope not, because that will be next January on the waiting list. So that's a long time without support. And even yesterday, he wasn't able to have a break. He needs, his brain is literally that activity, because of the epilepsy. He's so much. It makes him more tired. The concentration, all of those things are really tricky for him, because physically his brain is showcasing those abnormal the brain activity, because of his epilepsy. And so catering, even little things like that, have an impact. And he's been having more of one type of his seizures and things like that, because he's tired and anxious, and he's not getting that support that he needs. So the impact is real. The impact is real on our kids. The impact is real on us as parent carers.
Yeah.
And, it is hard.
Yeah, and it sounds like I think what you said earlier, or you were alluding to, that if he went into the fight sense rather than, or even the flight sense rather
Yeah.
than the freeze, he would have more visibility. Because when people freeze, when we see this with dissociation,
Yeah.
children dissociate, they just go very
Yes.
quiet and very almost invisible. That's the aim, is to
Yeah.
step backwards. But actually, when children go into a fight place, all of a sudden they're very visible, they're very destructive,
Yeah.
so all of a sudden they get all of this attention, and actually we need to do something.
Yeah.
So is that what you find? I mean, because you work with other parents, don't you?
Yeah.
With the supersensory squad.
Yeah.
But do you see that? I mean, that's not a reflection on the child or the parent,
No,
do you
no,
think?
yeah.
But it is a reflection on the system.
Yeah, I think, it's the system for sure, because kids can't help how they respond to things and all of those things, obviously, like, with the nervous system. But yeah, it's kind of sometimes you're like, and I don't want
No.
my child to be showcasing that fight response at school. Like, he sometimes showcases that at home. But you're like, well, actually, in the first instance, now it wouldn't necessarily make a difference with because the council, their panel, they don't know my child, they've never met my child, and they're making decisions about my child.
Yeah.
But at the first instance, yes, it's when we were first applying for it, it some of the kids who were maybe showcasing that fight response got in there kind of first, when actually different kids showcase different responses. And it just depends on their, fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. So it's hard because there are so many kids out there that need that support, but due to funding and all of those things, misspent, etc., over with the government and all of those things that aren't our kids' fault or our fault, it means they're not getting that support. And the only way that, yeah, the whole system needs an overhaul. And with the supersensory squad, we're trying to, make those small differences to maybe adapt to the classroom environment, to ensure, like, if someone is tactile sensitive, then thinking about placing them on the carpet with loads of other kids. Is that really the best place for them to sit in them? Because then if they get touched, then their fight and flight can get activated, and then they can hit out, or whatever. Whereas actually, if we can think about understanding sensory needs and sensory preferences and all of those things, it's a proactive approach to then hopefully supporting our kids.
It's prevention rather than
Yeah.
cure, isn't it?
Yeah.
As far as parents, because I suspect there have been many parents can really relate to what you're talking about on multiple levels, not just with the HCPs, but with other elements of trying to get support for their children. As a parent, what do you do to take care of you through something that's so challenging? Where is your support? Where's your support network? Because we have nuclear families and we have extended families, but also what other support is there for parents on a psychological and emotional level?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate that I have a lovely family, and friends that are supportive, and I've got to know a lot of other parents that have children with special educational needs, disabilities, because they fully have lived it and, like, fully get it. So that they know, like, if I'm sending a voice note, like, they're like, oh yeah, So it's nice to connect with others there. But I know that a lot of people don't have that
Mm.
support, and this is why, for example, I started my conversations with the Send Mum podcast, and actually I'm just putting the files together for it to run a community interest company, to provide peer support for parents. Because what really frustrates me and angers me is, like, I have right now the emotional capacity to be able to fight. Like, yes, it does have a detrimental impact on my health, absolutely, but for some people, if they receive that no, they may not have that capacity to be able to fight. Because, and also, if you think, you're like, you trust people's you're like, this is the authority. You trust that they have actually read it, which, I mean, they proved they hadn't read it in the first place for the assessment for ours, because it was really irrelevant information they sent back. But you trust that process, and you'll be like, there's so many parents that would be like, okay, they've said no. that must mean that, yeah, my son or daughter doesn't need an EHCP. And it's like, no, I want to be able to be like, look at the actual, I'm doing a send law course just to help myself, but also help others, and be like, actually, they are illegally rejecting certain ones bec- because they're not following the law. They're just trying to cut budgets. They're just trying to get any cuts they can. And so providing that peer group support of parents who've been there in that situation, that I think is going to be really, really helpful for that, because we all need that. I'm really not great at, I go into doing mode. And I suppose one of my coping mechanisms is to be like, well, I'm going through this situation. How can I help others? Like, I must be, I'm in this situation for some kind of reason. I'm a Christian, so I'm like, okay, God, help me to like help others through this. I now know exactly how it feels.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's how I cope with it. I've been going on morning walks and doing some free writing as well after. That's really helped me to like just get those thoughts out of my head onto paper that don't make sense necessarily, but it's just all the bits that pop into your head because you're uh, full
So
with them.
free writing, for anybody who doesn't
Yeah.
know what free writing is, it's literally you take a pen in your hand and you just write what comes out of your head. And there's, as you say, there's often no sense to it,
Yeah.
but it's emptying the mind, isn't it, of all of the whatever's going on, whatever's whirring around, because I think our minds get really busy. And I suspect you see this when we've got neurodiverse children. One parent may be neurodiverse.
Mm.
Um, so if you're somebody that's having to deal with this and you're neurodiverse,
Yeah.
I suspect from an emotional perspective, the overwhelm can be real for them.
Yeah.
So getting that support and that self-care piece
Yeah.
is more important than ever, I would imagine. And so for some, I suspect knowing you're not alone is a
Yeah.
massive thing, because I think you can feel very lonely in a world when you think you're the only person that's going through this. I think that group support is amazing. What
Yeah.
about one-to-one support? Do you find that people benefit from one-to-one support, therapeutic support maybe? Does that
Yeah.
help?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, chatting with people, thinking about, okay, what are some of the ways to help in this situation, whether that be that peer support one to one, or then for some, I refer myself to Steps to Wellbeing. I tried the kind of talking therapy. I wanted to do some CBT, is what I actually wanted to do, but they said talking therapy was better for me, but it actually wasn't that
Mm,
helpful for me because I talk to people anyway.
mhm,
So trying different things, I did do EMDR, the eye movement,
mm,
for something different, but actually that was really helpful for that. So it's finding what works for you. And yeah, and definitely like people I chat to and over WhatsApp voice notes and all of those things, they're like, thanks, like that was really helpful advice, and thanks for listening as well to like my rant or my venting.
Yeah, and I think it's really important as human beings to have a toolbox a self-care toolbox,
Yeah.
essentially, whoever we are. But I think it's even more important when you're advocating for your child and all of these doors are being closed potentially,
Mm.
so that because as parents, if we're emotionally fueled, if we've got enough emotional energy, we're more able to show up, aren't we, and be able to fight for our children. But again, it can be a real challenge to put that time aside, I think, and it's not going for a spa, it's going for that walk.
Yeah.
It's having a chat with that friend. It's journaling maybe
Yeah.
to be able to get some of the noise out of our heads and be able to get some clarity. Okay, what's the next step? think I think there's something in what you just said about a mindset of I'm a bit of as I've got older, and somebody said something to me a few months back about life is happening for you, not to you. And I think sometimes it can really feel like it's happening to us. And sometimes if we can see what is the universe trying to teach us? What is it that we need to do? Because the universe is challenging us. Um, and what are we taking from that and what are we learning from that to get through to that next hurdle? Because I suspect that you will get to the other side of
Yeah.
this. You will come to the other side. Whatever that looks like, there will be an end point to this. But when you're in the thick of it, sometimes you just don't know how long that's gonna be and whether or not you've got resources in your own mind to be able to cope with that, which can be really, really tough. I mean, so it's taken 2.5 years just to get an assessment.
Yeah, and then yeah,
Wow.
and then obvious and then tribu if we do have to go to tribunal to fight it, 'cause I will fight it at tribunal, and, LA's our local authority only win 3% of tribunal cases, parents win 97%. So, like, but that is then the dates are January right now, like, as in next January. So,
Yeah.
it's a long
It's
time.
crazy, isn't it? And awareness of neurodiversity has increased
Yeah,
such a lot in the last 10 years, hasn't it? And we are absolutely going in the right
yeah.
direction. But everything feels like maybe it's a little bit slower than you could really do with it being.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, because at the end of the day, they're our kids. We want to support them the best we can. We want them to be in an environment that they can get that support, and you've got to take it day by day, year by year. Because for some school, in the mainstream school, it doesn't work out because actually it's not the right environment. And so there are many kids that are out of school right now waiting for a specialist place, for example, because there aren't enough specialist places. And it's just really sad that we can't provide the right environment. We can't make adjustments, or we can't, provide the right environment to help
Mm,
support our kids.
mm,
Like, it just makes me
yeah.
sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And how important is extended family in these situations where we've got a neurodiverse child? Because one of the things that I see quite a lot is where grandparents or extended families really the previous generation, should I
Yeah.
say, really struggle with the concept of neurodiversity because historically we would have just been called naughty
Mm.
or just disruptive or whatever.
Yeah.
And how important is, let's just say a grandparent were listening to this
Yeah.
right now, trying to get some insight into what their own child is going through, trying to support their children. What piece of advice would you give extended family when it comes to supporting a family that has neurodiversity?
I think, listen to what what your child is saying about parenting their own child that's neurodivergent. Because I think things have changed a lot. There used to be, like, when I was growing up and, in that kind of era of those of us who are in our 30s or whatever, um, it's very much like it was more authoritarian, like, approaches and things like that. Whereas there's more gentle parenting coming involved, like, in the recent 10, 20, 10 years or etc. And I think, me and my husband say, like, we've got to parent our two children differently, because and it's understanding that, for example, like my son, he has a lot of kind of with food, he loves crunchy food and crispy food and things like that, and textures of food really impact him. And so it's understanding, like, oh, he's not just eating it, he's not just not eating it because he's just being rude or whatever. It's because the texture of it. With an OT, we were talking and she was like, the receptors in your mouth maybe are more sensitive to different textures, for my son than compared to me. And so therefore it really does impact. He literally can't eat certain textures because, and then he, like, gags and he spits it out and things. And it's not rudeness. It's literally because his receptors in his mouth are more sensitive than other people. So it's things like that, understanding, like, they, they can't always eat their sprouts or whatever because it, because it's literally physically there's those differences with those receptors. So it's kind of thinking about understanding, and I think looking for extended family and everyone needs to look at, rather than looking at behavior, like, as a, oh, they're behaving badly or whatever. It's like, right, okay, let's look below that. Like, if it's an iceberg we use with the supersensory squad, it's looking underneath the water and thinking, what's triggering that? How can I, as an adult, because kids, prefrontal cortex, the front of their brain is not fully, that rational part of the brain is not fully developed anyway. But it's thinking, how can I support this child? What's triggering them in the environment? Rather than just thinking of seeing that behavior and looking at that, you need to look deeper. and understand triggers and things like that for your specific grandchild.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we have to acknowledge is that in the grandparents or the extended families belief system and in their own programming, that's a very difficult thing to shift, isn't it? If they've been bobbing about the world for 60 years, let's just say, with this belief system, to then just try and switch that can be really challenging.
Yeah.
Something I say to people is that we don't necessarily need to understand. Now, we want people to understand. Well, so, for example, anxiety, depression, any of those things, we want people to understand, but they don't. And the reality is, I think unless you're in it,
Mm.
it's very difficult to understand. But what we can do is accept.
Mm.
Now, that doesn't take as much effort, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
And I think because if parents often are able to articulate, like you've just done, really well what their child needs or doesn't need,
Yeah.
maybe parents or extended family could just accept what is being told to them about their grandchild. And maybe, people can do, can't they? With instruction, people can do.
Yes.
Rather than judge because your grandchild is spitting their food out because the sensory, don't judge it. Just accept that this is, whether you don't need to necessarily understand, because I think understand is a much deeper level. Would you agree?
Yeah, fully yeah, and I mean, some will that sometimes it takes time, and sometimes it starts with that acceptance, and then some may want to investigate and understand and things like that, which is great which is great, and I'm fortunate that my the grandparents in my life want to understand it and ask questions now and things like that,
Yeah.
about how best to support my son, which is great, but it just sometimes takes time. You know,
Yeah, and not everybody has parents such as
no, yeah,
you, and they are very stuck in that
yeah,
concept of, well, actually, if they're just told or there's boundaries put in place, they'll behave in a way. And I think you and I have had this conversation around neurodiversity of square pegs and round holes.
yeah,
We've got to stop trying to get neurodivergent people that are square pegs into round holes, just because neurotypical is seemingly in the majority, that doesn't mean that we're superior in any way,
yeah,
shape or form. And I think that's what's really important. So yeah, maybe that message out there around acceptance. So
mm,
try not to judge,
yeah,
accept, listen to what your
and
own
ask
is
questions.
telling you,
Yeah,
ask questions, make it your business to understand.
yeah,
And if you don't, because understanding comes after acceptance.
yes,
And if it's important to you and you want to understand, there's enough resources out there now to
yeah,
get some insight, isn't there, as
yeah.
to what's
Yeah,
going
definitely. And I mean,
on.
that's why, for example, with the Super Sensory Squad, we did our course understanding sensory processing through stories. So it's got like videos for adults to understand like the different sensory systems, all 8 of them, and then how that impacts a child in their
Yeah,
daily life.
yeah,
And then also videos for the children as well to understand using the penguins of the penguin characters of the Super Sensory Squad. So
yeah.
it can be bite-sized simple things that you can watch in 10 minutes or whatever that will be really helpful in shifting that understanding and the mindset of, "Oh, okay, maybe it is because of this, not because they're just being rude," or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so and just a bit of empathy and
Yeah.
compassion that comes not just for the child, but also the parents that are trying to navigate this
Yeah.
incredibly challenging journey.
Yeah.
But I really hope that everything goes well for you, and I hope you
Yeah.
don't have to go to a tribunal.
Yeah.
Thank you so, so much for talking to me today, Nicole. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm absolutely sure that, when people listen to this, they're like, oh, yeah, I get this. I'm here, or I've been there, or, and what I'll do is I'll put all of your details in the show notes so
Yeah.
that people can access all of your courses and your podcast, so that they can get the support that they need as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome.